I bought another keyboard, Mike.
You did?
I did.
The DOS keyboard wasn't cutting it for you anymore, or what's the deal here?
I bought another one.
Of course, because you always need more keyboards.
Hey, you can never have too many keyboards. It's the way
All
it
right,
should
so what'd
be.
you get?
I bought another DOS. It's the Professional, the S series.
Okay.
So it's got the little hub on the side of it. Doesn't have the little dial in the top right. To me, that seems a bit excessive for what I'm doing. But I needed a mechanical for the job I took. So, yes, I was not about to work on those old membrane keyboards. I forget this. Totally buying a computer or a keyboard, even though they should probably buy it, but they wouldn't buy that sort of thing. So I bought it. Bought some new keycaps coming for it since I'm Dvorak all the way.
That's right. Oh, man. So this is quite an investment for a mechanical keyboard for what kind of computer are you hooking this up to?
I don't even know what it is. It's an HP something. I know that it's slow. Welcome back to the PC world, Joe. That's kind of how this goes. That's the big downside of the whole thing. So yes, I am working in the PC world. I will say Microsoft has made some pretty good changes in the last 9 to 12 months, I would say.
Yeah?
They're starting to come around. So I've been pretty happy with what I'm seeing out of them. But it's still a PC. It's still Windows.
Does it have all the extra stuff on it that makes it run half as fast?
Totally. I even had a thumb drive that I was going to boot a Linux system off of, and I plugged it into it and booted it off of that thumb drive, and it like freaked out. It was not happy, and it reported me to IT for doing it. So, yes, I got in trouble for that one, but you know.
Yeah, I think if you could clean that sort of stuff off of the majority of PCs, they would be pretty decent computers, but they come with all of that factory junk, and most people just never bother to clean it out. And so you end up with a severely governed / crippled machine.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I know when I've built PCs for the church, one of the first things I do with a brand new computer right out of the box is go in and do a factory restore on it. And it strips a lot of the extra stuff off of it. It doesn't usually, like, depending on where you got it, it doesn't always get all of it, but people always look at me funny. It's like, you just turned it on. Why are you destroying it? It's like, I'm starting over to get rid of all the cruft. And like one scenario, and then I'll stop talking about this, but in one scenario I did that, and I was checking the hard drive space to see how much space I gain from doing that. And it had, I think it was a 512 SSD, and it had almost 60 gigs taken up straight from the factory. I did the factory reset, and it was at 20. So it had 40 gigs worth of bloatware on this thing.
Jeez.
Ugh. I don't understand that, but they do it, and it's all in the name of making it faster.
Well, real briefly, since we're talking tech stuff, I also got some new gear, which I shared the picture with you before we hit the big red button. But I am recording this from a Mac Mini. I got sick of my microphone disconnecting from my Thunderbolt 3 dock that my MacBook was plugged into when I was recording podcasts. So this is a pretty awesome machine. I like it way better than I thought I would. I kind of viewed it as something that would get me by when I'm recording at my house, and I wouldn't have to ever touch it, wouldn't have to ever change anything. It would just kind of sit here, and I would use it when I needed to record something, but otherwise I would be running off my MacBook, which I still have, and my iPad. But I love this thing. It's awesome, and it's really fast. I also got a Synology because I've been needing some cold storage for a long time, and this seemed like the right time to get it. So this is a really expensive justification for not fixing my Thunderbolt 3 dock. But that was kind of the option I had, was like I could spend $300 or $400 on a new Thunderbolt 3 dock, or I could get this Mac Mini, which they just revamped them. Who knows if they'll ever update them ever again. Plus, it looks so cool. No, so yeah, I really like it though. I find it it's weird. Like, it's the same operating system. A lot of it is the same setup. It's the same keyboard, same mouse that I had been using, but it just feels so much snappier. And I find myself wanting to go down to my desk to work more. Maybe that's just because it's shiny and new. But
it's new, yeah. But you did the RAM upgrade on it though, right? Isn't that what you told me?
I did. Yep. So I got the nicer stock option. I didn't custom order anything because I needed something like tomorrow when I went to the store to look at them, and they had in the store the Core 4 and the 4 core and the 6 core. So I just bought the 6 core. It's the i5. I kind of wish it was the i7, but like I said, I couldn't wait for a custom order. And then I ordered the 32 gigabyte OWC RAM upgrade, which was, I think, $300 roughly instead of $600, which it would have been from Apple. I went on the internet, saw that it's user upgradable, and I used to build systems for a living. This is not average user upgradable for sure. It took me about an hour, and I didn't have any issues, but there's so much stuff that's crammed inside that little box, and it's really crazy all the different special tools you need and everything. I definitely wouldn't recommend it for a lot of people, but it is possible. And so, yeah, I've got it with more RAM than double the RAM, actually, that my MacBook had. And this is a pretty screaming little machine for what I use it for.
Nice. But you saved $300. Got the same results, sounds like. So.
Yep. Didn't have any issues once I turned it on. That's always the moment where I hold my breath. But yeah, it's working great.
Hit the power button and hold your fingers crossed and hope it boots.
Yeah, but 2018 Mac Mini, 2 thumbs up from Mike Schmitz.
Awesome. I'm jealous. I want one of these. But alas, I have a 2-year-old PC. Woohoo!
Well, to each their own. So we got some follow-up items here.
Yeah.
And really the only action item to follow up on is, did you have the talk?
Well, depending on the type of talk we're talking about, the talk, no, we did not have the talk. Kids are a little too small for that. But I did start the conversations with my parents and my in-laws. And this goes back to last book of Being Mortal, starting the conversation about what happens when we get to end-of-life scenarios. And of course, as you would expect, Mike, that's not necessarily a fun conversation to open up right away. And I wouldn't say that we had the formal conversation around it, but we at least talked around it so that people would start thinking about it. And I think that's the first step here. So we'll see my folks over the next few months again, and then we'll see my in-laws, I think, towards the end of this month. So we're recording this New Year's Day, so Happy New Year's. So we'll see my in-laws here later in the month, and goal is to talk through it more formally with them at that point from both sides. We're both aware of that. So it has begun. I don't have any answers on how it went. I'm not even sure I should share answers on how it goes, but
probably not.
It's at least in progress. Yeah, that'd be kind of weird, wouldn't
it? Yeah. Well, kudos to you for even attempting this, because I am not going to for quite a while. We did get some cool feedback, though, on that episode from a couple of people. One person said, "I appreciate you covering this book that was outside your comfort zone. Your uncomfortableness was evident, but you both covered the book well, as always. So appreciate that." P.F. Robbins, Stephen Lowry also had some nice comments about it. And it sounds like this book kind of spoke to Stephen. But yeah, I was really nervous when we recorded it. I was really nervous when I hit the publish button. And it seems like it's being fairly well received. So that's a little bit of a sigh of relief from me, because it's something that, when we covered this and when we recorded the episode, that we don't really feel like we're qualified to give advice on this particular topic, or don't have enough experience to really even speak to it.
Right.
But so far, so good. And I do think that there's a lot of value in having the conversation, and not just the conversation with your elderly parents, like what does the end of life scenario look like if you do find yourself in that situation, but really just conversation amongst the community. So selfless plug here for the Bookworm Club. I mean, if you want to get around other people who are going through the same sort of things, And that was really the surprising thing for me when we published this episode is like you had a really strong reaction to the book, and for you said it was kind of the right thing at the right time. Me, not so much, but there are obviously people like the people who have posted in the Bookworm Club here who are in the same shoes as you were, Joe. And I think it's really interesting. Maybe interesting is not the right word, but it's cool to see. It's cool to see how people in those similar situations, like you get around other people who are going through the same thing, and it's not just like the echo chamber type thing, but there's, without even explicitly offering encouragement to other people who are going through that thing, the fact that there's a group of people who are going through this tough thing together, that's encouraging to somebody who is in that situation. It makes you feel less alone, or it makes you feel that there is hope because other people are going through this. Other people have gone through it and they've come out okay on the other side. Like, it gives you hope that you will get through it and you'll be able to navigate it successfully. I'm probably doing a terrible job of explaining this analogy, but you get the drift. I hope that like there are other people out there, and just by sharing something, you don't know who that's going to impact.
I remember when we, before we really even got through like some of the small talk that we tend to do before we start recording, I remember you telling me that you were not looking forward to recording today, like that.
Nope, I was not.
And we both knew it was going to be kind of a hard episode to record. I am happy with the way it turned out. I'm glad it kind of comes across as, we're kind of nervous about how this was going to go. So I'm kind of glad it came across that way. Hopefully people don't get too offended by it. But, it's a tough topic. It's not talked about enough, I don't think. So,
yep.
Glad to contribute in some small way.
That actually leads to a somewhat related point that has really kind of been driven home for me recently, because David Sparks and I recently rebranded Free Agents too. So now it's called Focused, and it's more of a productivity podcast. And this short story behind that is that we were talking a lot about productivity stuff because that's who I am. That's what comes out, much to the chagrin of some of the listeners of Bookworm who wish we would cover more diverse books.
Whoops.
Yeah, and we're going through the forums for Free Agents, and there's a ton of people in there who are like, hey, great episode, really like your approach to this topic. And then they would always end it with something like, I'm not a free agent, or I have no desire to be a free agent, I'm happy working for the man, whatever. Like, they would phrase it however they want in their own words, but basically they felt kind of bad, like they were apologizing for listening and getting something out of the episode, even though they weren't a quote unquote free agent. And we were like, whoa, this is like half of our audience who is not a free agent. And then also there were a bunch of people who like I talked to about the show and like, oh, I'm not an independent worker, so I guess that show's not for me. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is. The stuff that we talk about, you can totally apply to just about any situation. So we want to make it a little bit more general. But anyways, David and I in our last episode talked about some of the struggles that we've gone through in our own free agent journeys. And there was somebody who had commented in the forum about depression related to free agency. And so we kind of tackled that as a topic. And again, same thing, like we're apologizing left and right, but we're not the ones who should be offering this sort of advice on this sort of thing. We haven't gone through it to the degree that other people have. And there was some really positive response to that too. Something somebody said in that forum though really hit me was the fact that like you don't have to be an expert in this stuff in order to talk about it. You just need to share your experience, and that makes you qualified. And I'm doing a terrible job again paraphrasing what they said, but it was encouraging because it's like, well, just because you haven't gone through this to the degree somebody else does, the fact that you're talking about it is a positive thing. And there's a lot of people who will benefit from this, and more people need to be talking about these difficult things. And so that's kind of the goal with the new show. As it pertains to this conversation, though, it's like talking about the failures, talking about the fact that you don't have it all figured out, and sharing from your mistakes. I really want to just encourage everybody who happens to be listening to this who feels in that position, because I've been there, and it can be difficult to, fortunately, this is episode 60, so a bunch of episodes under our belt, and there was no doubt that eventually we were going to hop on the mic and talk about it. But I think for a lot of people, maybe they find that they're in that spot and they're not sure whether to hit publish on the blog post that they wrote or not. Share your thing, share your experience, because you don't know who's out there who can benefit from it. And for somebody who finds that and reads that or listens to that or watches that, it's going to be the right thing at the right time. and you don't know who you're going to be able to help.
Exactly. There's still, like, there are other podcasts out there of people who read books.
Yep.
And this is not a unique, concept. We're possibly unique in the way that we go about it, but the concept of, or like the idea itself is not new.
Right.
Obviously, that has not stopped us. we don't think about it that way. It's all about making sure that, if you have something that you want to say, your voice is going to be different than a lot of people who are out there currently.
Yep.
Most likely. So everyone will resonate with a different personality in some varying degree. So you're better off publishing it, even just as an experiment to see what happens.
Right.
And see what comes of it. That's what I tell people is just, if you don't know if you should do it or not, try it and find out. That's the easy way to try it on.
Go make your thing. And to be honest, if I would have had a picture of what Bookworm would become now and the approach that I take to reading books now, I probably wouldn't have published the first one. If I were to go back and look at my approach to that book and the way that we covered it and just like how we put together the outlines and all that stuff, it's like, ugh, you idiot.
Yep.
But you learn, and it's still out there. I don't care. People can go back and hear me rail against getting things done, but like the value is in the journey as you figure these things out. And I think as you progress on your own journey, the tendency can be to look back at all the mistakes that you made. And my initial reaction, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, is, I wish I could go back and erase that or change that or fix that, whatever. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of value in recognizing this is where I was and this is where I am now. So that whole idea of like the gap versus the gain, you can see the growth when you compare where you were to where you are now. And that can be encouraging as opposed to just saying, I wish I was there. I wish I had a podcast with as many downloads as Mac Power users or whatever, So success is kind of relative, I guess. You can't judge your success by what somebody else has done. But also like the real definition of success, I think, is the fact that you're embarking on the journey and you're doing it consistently and you've applied the growth mindset and you continue to get 1% better every time that you do it.
You can't change the past and you can't get to Mac Power users level unless you've done it for 9.5 years.
What are they, 464 episodes now or something? And as we're recording this, Katie Floyd just recorded her last episode, which is kind of sad.
Yep. Sad day. But Steven's stepping in.
Yep. If there is one person who was qualified to speak to all of Apple history, past and present, it's Stephen Hackett.
No kidding.
So I'm looking forward to what they come up with. All right. Should we talk about today's book?
Yep. I'm expecting a lot of good things out of you today.
Hopefully I can deliver. Feeling a little bit under the weather. You can probably hear it in my voice, but we'll bring it.
All right.
So today's book is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, which, side note here, this is another one of those books with two authors, but when you're reading this, he's saying I, me, like it's very singular in the way that it's written. So I found that a little bit confusing when I read it this time, but whatever.
He even, like, Gary signed it at the very end,
yeah,
and Jay did not.
So let's assume that this is Gary Keller because I tend to refer to the author as a single person in the episode anyways, but it really fits with this book because it seems like anyways, Gary talking.
Yes.
So, but this was the book that I picked, I believe, number one when we did our draft, the 2018 Bookworm draft for episode 50, as my favorite book of all time. It was also one that my wife read recently, and she recommended that I go through again based on the current season of my life, which, not to get into all the details again, but I'm no longer working with Asian Deficiency. I find myself as a free agent for reals, and this is kind of uncharted waters for me, and it's led to, like we talked about last episode, my OmniFocus getting out of hand, my email getting out of hand, like everything that I've known seems to be wrong. So she said, you really need to go back and revisit this whole idea of the focusing question and the one thing. And yeah, you're probably right. So that's why I picked it for this episode. And I'm going to get this out of the way because no one else is going to see this, hopefully. But you actually have in the outline that we have here a rating of 0.5. And I asked you before we started recording if you were trolling me or if you really thought it was that bad. You assured me that you were trolling me. So hopefully we'll have some good conversation about this book.
Yes. And just to clarify, it was your number one pick on the draft. I did just double check that. And yes, I knew that this was going to be a book that Mike really would enjoy, especially if he has it as his number one. So I knew and know that you have a lot of good things to say about this book. So knowing that, it was the perfect time for me to just drop, because we never put our ratings in until we get to the end of it.
Yep.
So we don't know what each other has rated it until we're done and we're at that point. And it's only then that we'll do that actual reveal, even to each other. So yes, I put in a 0.5 in the outline. So yes, I'm just trolling you, Mike. You're okay.
So the book itself, I want to preface this with the subtitle here, because I think this sets the tone for the whole book. So the title is the one thing. The subtitle is The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. And I think that is important because this is a book that technically has 3 parts. Although I would say the most important takeaway from the book happens before the first part in the introduction.
Yeah.
And this is really the thing that I remembered when I did the draft episode, was the profound impact that this single idea had in my life. And that is the domino effect. And this is not something that is originated from Gary Keller, by the way. He gives credit where credit is due, so more credit than Charles Duhigg gave the MIT professors who came up with the cue routine reward thing. He says, in 1983, Loren Whitehead wrote in the American Journal of Physics that a single domino can topple another domino up to 50% larger. And this is a really powerful idea because, and he extrapolates on this, he gives very real examples. So if you start with a normal 2-inch domino, the 10th domino you would knock over if you assume that progression through each domino. And there's actually a YouTube video that I saw at one point. I couldn't find it again when I was prepping for this, but someone did this with like big wooden blocks, and they only did like the first several, but you can kind of see the effect that it has. So if you started with one domino and the next one was 50% bigger, the next one was 50% bigger, and you continued that chain, you start with a 2-inch domino. The 10th domino, he says, is going to be almost as tall as Peyton Manning. The 18th is going to rival the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The 23rd domino is going to be taller than the Eiffel Tower. The 31st domino is going to be 3,000 feet taller than Mount Everest. And the 57th domino would almost go from the Earth to the moon. So that's a really, to me anyways, a very powerful picture, because you can think about the big results that you want to achieve. And it's really interesting, I think, that we're covering this book and we're recording this on January 1st. So this is the time of the year when people are going to set their goals and they're going to have their New Year's resolutions, and I'm going to lose 30 pounds this year, whatever. Well, the way to do that is not to focus on the big goal that you want to achieve, but what is that one thing, that first domino that you can knock down? And that's the idea that he comes back to throughout the rest of the book.
I think it's interesting you picked this book at this time of the year. I don't think you intended that.
I didn't.
But it's oddly a good one.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So what was your impression of this domino idea? Did you have the same, like, oh my gosh, that's amazing reaction that I had when I first read it? Or were you kind of like, yeah, I understand that already because we've read enough of these books now?
I got you nervous with that 0.5 rating, didn't I? Like you're itching.
Well, no, I just want to, I'm not even necessarily looking for like validation or anything, but I'm kind of curious, like what sort of reaction did you have to this? Because I had a very strong positive reaction when I read it the first time. We talk about this all the time. These productivity books tend to be longer than they could be. This one, I think, we'll get into this in the other parts. Like there's a lot in here,
yeah.
But if you were just going to take away this one thing, like you get the main idea from the one thing in the first 20 pages. So
right.
Is it like, okay, we've heard this over and over again? Or are you like, yeah, that's a really powerful idea?
Yeah, I would say he does a very good job of explaining the concept in the very beginning. And then post beginning, like post the intro, he goes through things that would derail you from it. and then ways to set yourself up for success with that question of what is the one thing. And I don't think it's too long. I don't think it's too short either. I feel like he did a pretty good job of setting the density on the book. So that's a piece that I was very appreciative of. The intro with the domino effect, I can't say that I had a guttural reaction like that, Mike, but it was one of those that, okay, this is an interesting concept. I understand it. It's one that helps me understand the consequential process of if I knock down one task, no matter how small, as long as it's pointed in the direction that I need to go, it can set me up to knock down a domino that's bigger than the one I originally knocked down. Like that I understand, but I can't say that it was profound to me.
Okay. Yeah, and that's fair. Really, the thing to get from this first section, which completely rocked my world the first time I read it, was that on page 10, he says, you need to be doing fewer things for more effect instead of doing more things with side effects. So you can apply that to your own situation. When I read that, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all of these different things and I don't have time for this thing, which I know is most important. And I need to cut out all this other stuff that I'm doing, which if you listen to any sort of productivity podcast, like you'll hear that sort of advice over and over again, but it really is that important. Like everything that you do during your day, why are you doing it? What is it accomplishing? What is the end result of that chain of dominoes from you knocking that thing over? And a lot of people, and this is where I was when I read this the first time, it's like, well, I have to do this thing and I have to do that thing and I have to do that thing. And then maybe by the end of the day, when I've got a little bit left over, I'll figure out what's my one thing left. Like what's the one thing with the resources that I have left available to me. The problem with that approach though, is that like you get to the end of the day and you're exhausted and you don't do the thing that you say is most important, whether you're trying to start a side business or write a book or whatever your New Year's resolution happens to be this year. Like that's why they fail, is you've got all the things that you have to do, and then you try to add this one thing on top of it. Let's just talk about New Year's resolutions for a minute, because a lot of them are like, I'm going to eat healthier, I'm going to save more money, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to exercise more. All of those things are probably the most important thing that you could be doing. Like if you don't protect the golden goose, if you don't take care of your health, it doesn't really matter how much work you're able to get done. It's not going to be sustainable. And you're going to burn out, and it's going to have probably long-term effects on your health. Ultimately, you're going to live a shorter life. And that's just the natural progression of that thought process, but people don't typically go there. So let's assume that we aren't living a healthy lifestyle. So the number one thing we can do is figure out how to make a healthy lifestyle. But most people won't take exercise or getting to the gym as the single most important thing in their day. And I'm not arguing that everybody should, but seeing it from that perspective is kind of a game changer, because then instead of trying to fit one more thing into your jar, you're kind of dumping out your entire jar and you're putting that thing in first, and then everything else can kind of fit in around it. The first things first analogy, from Stephen Covey. But when you do it that way, surprisingly, it works. Like the things that you quote unquote had to do, you still figure out a way to get those things done. But when you put the things that are important but not urgent, I'm scrambling all of the productivity metaphors in this one story. But
good job.
Hopefully you're getting the point that I'm making here is like, you can't just say, I'm going to do this one additional thing. You have to rethink how you've constructed your life currently if you want to make this thing the most important thing. And that's the message that I think the one thing does a really good job with.
I will say this is good timing for me right now. I mentioned like the PC and going to work for a company. I have started going back to, I'm now a corporate monkey. Woo! But in that process of joining a company, I have to cut back on all the little things that I've had going on. Bookworm's not going anywhere. Just going to say that. So no worries there. So I have had to be particular with what is it that drives me to my mission. And this book it's perfect timing for me because it forces me to work through those pieces of what is the most important thing I should be working towards. Is it the corporate job? Is it the side gig? Do those work together towards one mission? Like, those are the questions I need to answer, and this book I feel like is perfectly suited for that. It does work through that. So it's hitting me at exactly the right moment.
Nice. Last thing I'll say about the introduction here before we get into the three different parts. There's a ton of chapters in here. I think there's like 18 different chapters. Let's see.
Yes, 18.
So we're not going to cover all of the chapters in depth. I kind of picked out a couple key ideas from each section, except where there were lists, which we can go through kind of quickly. But in chapter 3, which is still part of the intro, it's called Success Leaves Clues. And so this whole idea here is that there are other people who have succeeded, and if you do what they did, you can get the results that they got. Obviously, every situation is going to be a little bit different, but he talks about the most successful companies are known for one thing. He talks about how on page 24, the unintended consequence of abundance is that we are bombarded with more information and choices in a day than our ancestors received in a lifetime. I really do think like that's a contributing factor. If we can just cut out all the noise and figure out what is the one thing, regardless of how big it is and how much effort it takes to knock down that first domino, like it doesn't have to be a lot, but if we can select the right things and work on them, then once you start going down that path, the results will come maybe quicker than you realized. But there's a key idea here which really impacted me. No one succeeds alone. On page 20, he says, everyone has one person who either means the most to them or was the first to influence, train, or manage them. And when I read that, I wrote down one of my action items is, who can you be that one person for? And it's kind of an interesting situation because I never really considered Bookworm like a big podcast. I really haven't considered anything that I've done to be like really out there in terms of like, this thing is really impressive. But I've had people approach me and say that about different things that I've done. And obviously when that happens, it feels good personally because it's kind of like validation that this thing that I created is actually it does actually have some value. Other people see value in it. But when I see those situations now, after reading this section in the book, I want to apply a little bit more intentionality in my response to those, if that makes sense. So when someone reaches out and says, hey, I loved that last episode of Bookworm that you recorded on this particular topic, instead of just saying, hey, thanks, appreciate the kind words, dig a little bit deeper, find out what that person is wanting to do. Maybe they have a goal to start a podcast or something. Well, I know how to start a podcast. I know the process there. So maybe I can be that person who is the first to influence, train, or manage them and get them going down the path of success. Like they start their podcast and it turns into something big, and they can look back and be like, yeah, really the tipping point for me was when Mike helped me do X. Like I want to look for those opportunities. And this is a classic Mike action item in that I have no idea how you're going to be able to hold me accountable to this. But the real acid test, I think, of this action item is like what is that? Stephen Covey's second habit, I think, begin with the end in mind. One of the exercises in there is like to think about your own funeral and who's going to show up and speak at your eulogy sort of thing. Like I want a huge line of people saying, yeah, Mike helped me do this. Not so that I can pat myself on the back or anything, but I think there's a lot of people who are kind of on the fence. They're right at that tipping point between this thing getting wings and flying or them just giving up on it. And I want to be the type of person who can help push them over the edge and get that thing airborne.
Which is a very noble thing to do. Like that's a thing that I feel like there are a lot of people that like to do that. I don't think there are a ton of people that are good at it. I feel like you would be good at it, Mike.
Hopefully. I mean, that's the goal behind the workshop I'm doing this Saturday.
Go, Mike.
But Yeah, so I guess after that, we'll have a little bit more larger sample size. People can either say, yep, you're good at this, or nope, no, you're not. Find something else.
You going to share the results?
Well, that's the thing. That's kind of what I was talking about with the action item. Like, I don't think this is something that you can hold me accountable to, because you don't really know what impact this has until the end, and then you can see everything. And somebody shows up at your funeral and says, hey, that point when Mike helped me launch my podcast or encouraged me this way, like, and that was the thing I needed to actually do my thing, get my book published, whatever. Like, you don't really know what impact that stuff has until it's all said and done. But I don't want to wait till it's all said and done to look back and be like, oh man, I should have not been such a selfish jerk.
Yep. I feel like I'm just trying to figure out if we should talk through the question itself before we get into the lies, or if you want to go through the lies first.
Well, the question itself is actually the focusing question in part 2. So maybe we'll just leave that for now and just kind of understand that the idea here is that you don't need to be doing a ton. You just need to be doing the right things. You can start small, that first 2-inch domino, and that's going to create the momentum that you need to produce the big results. And then part 1 gets into the 6 different lies, they're called. And these are different things that we've kind of talked about and around on Bookworm, but we can just kind of run through these maybe real quickly. So the first lie is that everything matters equally. The second one is multitasking, and that's just the name of the chapter, but he basically says you can't multitask, and we've talked about that. We've talked about Chris Bailey's approach to it. After reading this section, I do kind of find myself going back to, you should probably just stay away from multitasking. The third one is a disciplined life. The fourth one is willpower is always on will call. The fifth one is a balanced life. And then the last one is that big is bad. So maybe let's start here with everything mattering equally. I think the key takeaway from this, if you were to condense everything in this chapter, would be a concept called Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. And he kind of shares the story behind this, which was kind of cool. You've probably heard this other places, but one of the things he does a good job of, in my opinion, is giving credit where credit is due and condensing the stories down while still making sure that you understand where they came from. So this one originated from an Italian economist. I believe it's Vilfredo Pareto. In the 19th century, he stated that 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. And this is a concept that people have applied to productivity, the basic idea being that 80% of the results are going to come from 20% of the effort. So what you need to do is figure out what are the things that are going to produce the 80% of the results from the 20% of the effort. Something that's really powerful in this section, though, is what he calls extreme Pareto, where if you apply that principle to itself, you can really figure out like what is the single thing, not the 20%, but what is the single thing you can do that's going to have the most impact. So if you take the 20% of the 20% of the 20%, I did the math on this. The 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20 is 51.2% of the value from 0.8% of the effort. So you get the principle here. Like you can keep following this. He's saying, and I don't know that this is completely true, but I kind of feel like it is. It feels like there is truth to this, where if you just do the one thing that is the most important, kind of the rest is going to work out. And that's kind of been my own experience, but it's kind of hard to quantify that too. It's kind of hard to say this is the one thing looking back that produced 51.2% of the value.
Right.
But I think the principle definitely applies. Like there's one thing that you can do at any given moment that is the most important.
Yeah.
And if you can figure out what that is, you're in real good shape.
I think that concept of doing the 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20, like I feel like I've heard someone say that before, but it didn't trigger with me like it did this time. And whenever I was reading through it and thinking about like my task lists and what I have on my docket, it struck me that this is really something that could have a lot of strength behind it. Like if I work through and get down to the single most important task, like people talk about your 3 MITs in a day, your most important tasks in a day. Like that's a pretty common thing that you'll see in the productivity space of put together your list of MITs. Great. But really you're after the one.
Yeah.
And I think if you were able to drive it down that far, like all of the prioritization and the decision-making process of which one should I do next and what should my contexts be, well, all of that disappears whenever you're down on the single task, because it's not a matter of doing the task when you're in a context. It's a matter of putting yourself in a context to do the task and doing it the other way around. Like that, all of that hit me just by working through this 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20. So I really like that part.
Yeah, I think, I don't know this for sure, but trying to think back to previous me, I think maybe the impact that this book had on me had to do with this concept of you don't need to worry about the 3 MITs or the 5 MITs or whatever productivity system you happen to use. They kind of are all built that same way where it's like, these are going to put you in the best possible position to win your day. Okay. But the one thing is kind of like, you don't have to worry about the whole day. All you've got to worry about is what do you do next? And that feels a lot more approachable, I think.
Right.
Where you don't have to have the whole thing figured out. You just need to figure out what's the 2-inch domino I need to knock over right now. And then once you start doing the one thing and you knock over a couple of dominoes and you get some momentum, I kind of think that at that point, you've got a little bit more clarity on the direction that you're heading, and that's what creates the momentum to knock over the bigger dominoes. But for somebody who's just completely overwhelmed and stressed out and they're trying to figure out what's best next, like this is the approach that you should take.
Yeah, because the main point of this chapter 4, everything matters equally, is that they don't. That is the lie. And if the one most important thing drives, what'd you say, 53 point something percent?
51.2, yeah.
Yeah, so if it drives that amount of the value, then it's pretty obvious it's not all the same. Like me helping a coworker with how to sort an Excel file versus driving together the real-time live database reporting. Completely made up examples there, but that's the concept.
Yep.
Those two things are not the same. And I think everybody knows that intuitively.
Yep.
But not everyone's willing to say it out loud.
Right.
You also can't do those two things at the same time.
Oh, nice segue into multitasking.
Boom.
So we've talked a lot about multitasking on this podcast because it comes up in a lot of the books that we've read. The most recent revelation, I guess, I've gotten on this was when we did Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey. And he kind of explained it in a way that at the time seemed really profound to me. And I think going back and rereading the one thing that Gary Keller kind of says it in the same way. I think that Chris Bailey has a better visual to help you understand this. But he basically says in the one thing, since that's the book we're covering today, that you can do two things at once, but you can't focus on two things at once, which sounds super simple and obvious, but we're stupid and we try to do a bunch of stuff at the same time anyways. When we multitask and we're trying to focus on two things at the same time, we end up going back and forth really fast. We context switch. And what's interesting in this book is how multitasking even came about. He tells the story that it came from the 1960s, and it was used to describe alternately sharing a resource like a CPU in a computer. And in time, it's come to mean multiple tasks being done simultaneously by one resource for a person. And when you think about it that way, especially in the 1960s where computers were not the 2018 Mac Mini that I've got running on my my desktop here right now with the 6 cores all firing at the same time, like you've got, I don't know, 10 megahertz or whatever. Megahertz is probably too much for back then. But like even in that time, like you have all of this computing power. This is an insanely powerful machine, but it can only do one thing at a time. And so the fact that it's switching back and forth so fast, it seems like things are being done at the same time. That's where multitasking comes from. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff he shares in here, a whole bunch of research. The one that really I liked was a 2009 study by Richard Nass with 262 people. And the big takeaway was that, quote, multitaskers were just lousy at everything, unquote.
I love that.
Yeah. Another one was multitaskers experience more, his words, life-reducing, happiness-squelching stress. So those two statements in particular really just articulate to me the profound negative impact that multitasking can have. And when you read Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey, you're like, oh, I think that there's a way around this. I could make this work. But when I went back and I read the one thing, it's like, I'm not even going to try. I don't want to take a chance and sign up for life-reducing, happiness-squelching stress. Keep me away from this stuff.
I don't remember what book it was now, but there's the example of you write the numbers, I think it's 1 through 10.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
I remember we did that exercise. I forget what episode that was.
Yeah, you write the numbers 1 through 10, and then you write multitask. Is it multitask or multitasking? Maybe it's 12 and you do multitasking. However many letters there are in multitasking. I'm not going to count them right now. So the idea is that you write the M and then 1, the U and then 2, L and then 3, and you go back and forth. And you time yourself when you do this until you're done. And then you turn around and you do it again. You time yourself and you write the word multitasking, and then you write the numbers 1 through 12. I think it's 12. And then you check your time and see what the difference is between there. That's the difference that multitasking causes just from a sheer time stance. And even in a task that small, it's quite a bit different. So
yeah.
If you want an example, go do that. Anyway, I have people do that on occasion. I've yet to bring this up in the office I'm in now. I don't know that I will for a while. But
that sounds like a conversation that may be less fun than the one that you're having with your in-laws.
Yeah, I'll talk to my in-laws about end-of-life care before I'll talk about multitasking in the office.
Yeah.
Yes. People get it. You can't do two things at once. You can't focus on two things at once. Yes, you can accomplish chewing gum and listening to a podcast at the same time, but that's not a multi-focusing scenario. It's just habits taking over. So,
yep, exactly.
I think people get it.
Right. Another thing that stood out to me in this section, specifically because we just got done reading Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, is he says, I forget what page it was, but he says, we expect pilots and surgeons not to multitask, which Atul Gawande is a surgeon. In the Checklist Manifesto, he specifically spoke to pilots and checklists and things like that too. So
right.
Those two specific people groups, we expect them not to multitask. So why is it okay if we do it? Why should we ever tolerate multitasking when doing our own most important work? So maybe somebody's life isn't held in the balance whether you try to do two things at once during your workday, okay? But the point he's making is that it's still not okay. Just because no one's going to die doesn't mean that that you should be doing it this way. And it kind of makes it seem more, I don't want to say more serious, because it really, in my opinion, it is a serious thing. One of the things that got me going down this faith-based productivity thing is this whole idea of stewardship. And I believe that we are going to be held responsible for what we do or don't do in this life. It's not just you're going to feel more fulfilled if you're quote unquote more productive. Dang it, I said quote unquote.
Did you do it on purpose? I do it on purpose.
I didn't. But the fact of the matter is, like, regardless of your religious belief system, you have so much time on this earth. And Gary Keller is basically saying that it is a crime to limit your effectiveness and to make things take longer, take more effort. Like, waste is a crime, basically. And the way to eliminate that is simple. Just don't try to do two things at the same time.
Right.
I I think like when he explains it this way of like pilots and surgeons, yeah, they shouldn't be able to multitask. But then it's also like, well, they're more high functioning. Why should you feel that way? Like, why should they be held to a higher standard than you would hold yourself? I really believe like a lot of productivity and a lot of being effective, a lot of goal accomplishment is just simply holding yourself accountable to what you say you're going to do. Personal responsibility, if you want to call it that, where if you make a promise to yourself that you're going to do this thing, regardless of somebody's holding your feet to the fire or not, sometimes that's helpful. We'll talk about that in a little bit, I believe. But that's not always necessary. If you can just simply make a promise to yourself and then fulfill it, like you can do a lot. And it's kind of it's a limiting belief, I think, to say, well, oh yeah, well, pilots and surgeons, obviously, like they shouldn't do this. But willingly accepting that standard for yourself is how you get to that level.
Yeah, I don't really understand why, especially, like I think about people in meetings, like they're definitely distracted. And there's a lot of meetings where very big decisions are being made that impact entire industries or entire countries or the entire world. And they're on their phone while they're listening to the presentation that they're going to use to make those decisions. How is that different? Like that's...
Yeah,
it's the same. Like you have a lot of people's lives at stake in a lot of cases. Now, that's an extreme scenario. Maybe those meetings don't happen as often as I'm suggesting, but I would say that they happen more often than we would like to give credit. So, yes, just don't do it. Just don't.
Well, let's make it personal. Okay, so maybe you're not having a meeting and you're making these really important decisions that are going to affect the entire company, whatever, but maybe it's your son or your daughter who's going through something at school and they're trying to talk to you about what's going on, but you've got your face in your phone and you're looking at Twitter and you don't even recognize the moment, okay? That could kill that relationship. That one instance could be the tipping point for them where they're just, oh, mom or dad just doesn't really listen. They don't listen. You don't know when the defining moment is going to happen. So pay attention for those things and don't try to do more than one thing at once, because in that particular moment, if you can recognize that this is critically important and I need to give my full attention to this thing, you have a much better chance of navigating that successfully. And I firmly believe with parenting specifically, it's a series of moments like that either build or erode the relationship that you have with your kids. Again, I'm probably not the person who's qualified to speak to this because my oldest is 11 years old. He's not a teenager yet. Okay, but I do know that we've implemented some things that have allowed us to foster the relationship that we have with our kids to the point where I am happy with where we're at, because I've always wanted to have that sort of relationship with my kids when they got to be teenagers where they felt they could be comfortable talking to me about anything. You can't wait till they're teenagers and then say, son, daughter, you can talk to me about anything. You have to prove it along the way. So, I mean, I've talked about this before, but one of the things we do is we have like the weekly thing where I'll go do something with one of my kids. So not doing a one-on-one with each of them every week, but a different one every week. So it ends up being more like once a month. But you do that consistently enough, and maybe the first couple times that you do something like that, it's awkward. I've got a couple of kids who are a little bit shy, and the first time we did it, it was a little bit awkward, but it's to the point now where they look forward to it, and it creates the intentionality and the space for the relationship to grow. And a lot of positive stuff has come out of that, but it's been the consistency in doing it over and over and over again that has gotten it to the point where it is today. I want to keep that going because I want, by the time they're 18 to say, yes, we've successfully navigated this season of our life. And I can't say that I've successfully done that yet, but you can do the one thing, going back to the main idea of this book, You can do this one thing on Friday morning, like this is the most important thing, and everything else is going to go around this, and that can lead you to the results that you're looking for. And I think like those moments happen more often than we realize. So for multitasking, we're not even going to see them the majority of the time.
Yeah, I think phones get in the way with a lot of this when you start thinking about kids. So anyway, I could belabor that, but I don't think I think you've covered it well, Mike. So good job.
We've talked about that before.
Yes.
Another thing we've talked about, that's number 7 is willpower. But number 6 is a disciplined life, or chapter 6.
Yeah.
Key idea here that I wanted to talk about was that life isn't a marathon. It's a series of sprints. And he says on page 55 that success is actually a short race. It's a sprint fueled by discipline just long enough for habit to kick in and take over. So the goal of discipline, he says, is to build these habits. And he even says that no one is disciplined. People just train successful habits into their lives to make them look that way. This is kind of radical, I think, based on a lot of the books that we've read, which would talk about how you can build willpower like a muscle, and you're going to use that to live a disciplined life. Willpower is the next chapter, so we'll get into that in a little bit here. But I do think that the main idea here of creating positive habits is a very powerful one. I know you've sent me a message about Atomic Habits, and we're going to have to cover that one at some point here. I love that book. I gifted, actually, I think 4 copies of that for Christmas to people.
Nice. I have it.
Yeah, it's so good. But the main idea there, again, is like the way to implement these big changes is not to try to accomplish something big, but to create the habits that are going to take you there. And I think that for the right person at the right time, this whole idea of I may not be disciplined and that's okay, can be really powerful, because then it kind of gives you freedom to, or maybe freedom's not the right word. It feels, I don't want to say more approachable again, but it's kind of like, you can look at this and say, well, I haven't shown much discipline up until this point, so I guess I'm disqualified. And he's saying, no, you're not disqualified. In fact, if you look deeper, all of the successful heroes that you have suck at this too. But they've just created these habits, and you can do the same thing.
Yeah, I tell people I suck at discipline and following through on commitments I make to myself. Yeah, I'm terrible at it. So I'm not one that can speak to what it disciplined life really looks like. I feel like I'm breaking my own rules all the time. But, there's, back on page 55, which side note here, he does underline, like the book itself has underlining printed into it.
Yeah, that's weird.
The first time I ran across, like, wait, I wanted to underline that. You can't underline that for me. And then my underlinings are lost to some degree in the midst of his. I didn't like that.
Well, I think the intended effect was that people are going to pick up this book and they're going to skim through it, and they're not going to listen to what I'm going to say. So I'm going to underline stuff so it jumps off the page and really make that stand out. So I think it does do that well. But yeah, for people like us who want to go in and mark them up ourselves, it was a little bit annoying, because I didn't want to underline on that section. I wanted it on the section that came right after that. And now it looks like they're both underlined.
Right. It bothered me so much. I was paying attention to the underlining itself, because they even make it look like it's a pen or a pencil or something that's doing the underlining.
Yep.
And it's the same image that they put on it. They have the same, like, it starts up and it has a slight hill and then it has a slight dip. The first time the underline starts, it always has that. It's just longer or shorter. Like, I even noticed it to that degree. I was so focused on what they underlined instead of the words that they're underlining. Like, don't do this. Authors,
No,
if you're writing, don't do this. Please. So anyway, page 55, what I was getting at. You don't need to be a disciplined person to be successful. In fact, you can become successful with less discipline than you think, for one simple reason. Success is about doing the right thing, not about doing everything right.
Yep.
And that is something that I definitely appreciated him saying, because there's so many times you see folks who talk about you need to work 70, 80 hours a week in order to be successful. We'll leave that one unnamed. But there's people that talk about things like that, and then you have to do this 80 hours worth of work, and you have to do it all extremely well in order to be successful. That's not actually true.
It's garbage.
Like, it's, success is about doing things small. And I think he says that a few times in here. It's like, huge success comes from being tiny.
Yeah.
Like that's essentially what you're after. And seeing that he had a disciplined life under the lies section kind of made me feel better about myself. So, so thanks for that, Gary.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I do think there is some truth to leading a disciplined life.
Yes.
But I understand his point, so I'm willing to leave it for now.
Yeah, and no matter how you come at this, the focusing question that how you decide the one thing, he even has a whole routine and stuff that he'll give us, and we'll talk through it later. But that all requires a fair amount of discipline in itself.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
He himself is not saying that you can be completely undisciplined and still be highly successful. He's not even saying that. So it can come across that way with what we just said, but it's not actually true.
Printed clickbait. Also in this chapter, he mentions a 2009 University College of London study regarding the habits. And this is a powerful idea, I think, because there's a belief that it takes 21 days to make a habit. That's not true. This study found that the average is 66 days, but the full range was anywhere from 18 to 254 days. So the key thing here for me is the 254, because when you start to create a habit, if it takes longer than you think it's going to take, you start to think like, well, maybe this just isn't going to work for me. And really in this section, he's saying that, no, it is going to work. It just maybe is going to take a little bit longer to build that habit than you think.
I don't know how long it is for me. I think it depends on what I'm doing.
Yeah, it depends on the habit and whether there's one there, that's how firmly it's ingrained, what you're trying to replace. Like there's a lot of variables there. But the key thing that I want to point out is that if you struggle with something, it doesn't mean you're a failure. Keep going, because once you do get to the point where this is a habit, then it is going to be not on autopilot, not automatic, but it is going to be significantly easier. All right, the next one, willpower.
Yeah, we've talked about this one quite a bit. We even did a whole book on willpower way back at the beginning of Bookworm. I don't think I want to listen to that one. Like that far back. I'm not sure how well we did with this. But the lie here is that willpower is always on will call. There's a lot of folks who tend to say, I can will myself to do something. It's like, that's great, but when are you doing that? First thing in the morning? 9 o'clock at night? That chocolate cake looks a lot better at 9 o'clock at night than it does at 8 a.m. So, that is not true. Like, it definitely ebbs and flows, comes and goes throughout the day. And I think everybody would agree that morning, when you first started your day, is always going to be the time when you've got the most willpower. And he definitely calls that out and then takes advantage of that later on when he's putting together, how you should go about structuring some of this. But that is a piece that I think is important. I think I've operated that way for a long time, Mike. Like I've always kind of used my mornings as a special time to try to get my stuff done. Because I know that's when I'm going to be able to focus on it more. And then I let people put meetings and stuff on the calendar in the afternoon. It's like, here, I'll come talk to you about all this important stuff when I'm tired.
Right.
So
there's a whole bunch of productivity takeaways from this chapter, specifically the one story he shares on the Stanford School of Business study. And I'm going to try and condense this down and really just make the main points that he's making here, but there's a ton in here. So the study, they analyzed a little more than 1,100 parole board hearings, and they found that the judges heard the arguments, and then they had 6 minutes to render a decision. They only had 2 breaks during the day, a morning snack and then a later lunch. And what they found is that the parolees' chances of being released peaked at about 65% right after the breaks and then dropped to almost 0% later in the day. What that shows is that their willpower got depleted. And one of the points he makes here is that willpower is limited, but it is a renewable resource. It can be replenished with downtime. But also it shows that their default answer, because they're talking about whether to release this person back into society, was no. Now, this prompted a question for me, as I read this, just the way my brain works, of what are your default answers? And I think you could apply this to a lot of different scenarios. It's going to be different for everybody, but there's two kinds of willpower he talks about in here. We covered this in the book, The Willpower Instinct, but there's willpower, so I want to do something, and then won't power, I want to not do something. And I think specifically when it comes to these default answers, it maybe is a worthwhile exercise to figure out what are the things that you have trouble applying won't power to, like Netflix or eating unhealthy snacks, like a bag of chips that happens to be in your pantry or whatever. I didn't actually make a big list to share on the episode here, but it did get me thinking, like, what are the things that I tend to default to? And then what are the habits that I want to create to change those default answers? He says on page 69 that we lose our willpower not because we think about it, but because we don't. So the process for me, at least the way I see it in my head, is to think through these things that are triggering my default answers, and then create systems or habits around those to eliminate the negative behaviors or create the positive behaviors that I want to create, so that I don't have to invest my willpower in order to do the thing that I want to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
At least to me.
So I guess maybe this is an action item. I didn't write it down as an action item per se, probably because I'm in the middle of revamping my morning, evening routines and what's my workday going to look like anyways. I guess maybe I just didn't think I needed to be held accountable in this.
Is that your New Year's resolution?
It could be, I guess. We can follow up on this if you want, but I do want to just throw it out there to other people too, to think about this in their own lives, because I think that identifying these things is going to be important. A lot of times it's simply just recognizing what is really happening that allows you to make the change that you want to make. So if you identify that you get home at the end of the day, you're really tired, and Netflix is so accessible, but you know that you lose 3 hours every night because you're binge watching whatever, then maybe like Dan O'Reilly, you need to take the batteries out of your remote and just introduce a little bit of friction there, which is going to win you back 3 hours a day. Like that's kind of a ridiculous example, but that's the kind of impact I think that the thinking about your willpower can have. And again, we're still just in the lies section here. We're going to get into the truth, focusing question, but really these are the things in this section. If I were to paraphrase this, these are the things that will contribute to you not being able to do the one thing. So with willpower specifically, maybe the belief is, I'm going to do my one thing when I get home from work. And then you get home from work and you find yourself in a situation that you're not physically equipped to deal with because your willpower has been depleted, and you're sabotaging yourself just because of the way that you've structured your day, sort of a thing.
Yeah. I think a good example of this is diet. And I can speak to this personally now. Due to health stuff, I'm working through my first ever Joe's going to go on a diet sort of thing. And not to lose weight by any means. If you've met me in person, you know I'm thin as a rail. The last thing I need to do is lose 20 pounds. I don't know that I would be around much longer if I did that. But that's just the way I am. So because of health, I'm working on implementing a diet that does some things like cutting out sugar and such. My default has always been, I can eat pretty much whatever I want and I'm fine. But that's not the case anymore, which means that my best case scenario is to set myself up such that the environment around me makes it very easy to stick to that diet. So I can't just rely on the willpower side of things, because we've read enough about this, we've studied it enough to know that I will fail given the opportunity. It will not go well if I allow myself to just trust my instincts. I will instantly fall in that process. So I have been working through new defaults on what do I grab for snacks when I'm done at work? What do I grab for, a mid-morning 11sies? What do I use for second breakfast? These are very important questions that all hobbits need to answer. So I need to recreate what my default answers are for those in order to prevent myself from relying on willpower later on. Because as the lie says, willpower is always on will call. That's not true.
Yep.
And I know better.
Yep.
So I'm not going to rely on it.
Right. All right. So next one, a balanced life.
Doesn't exist.
Exactly. So this, I was really excited when I saw the title for this because I think it was a 12-week year we were first introduced to the concept of intentional imbalance. That's kind of what he's advocating for here also. Although the visuals that he has in this section do kind of show work on one side and life on the other. And personally, I don't think it's that simple. I don't think those are the only two distinctions.
No.
And in fact, later on in the book, he talks about some different areas that you want to apply the one thing to. So I would argue that there is just life and your work is a part of that, but it's up to you to balance this whole thing. But the visuals indicate like there's work and then there's life. And he's basically saying that when you're doing one, you're not doing the other. And so it's kind of this balancing act or counterbalancing act where you're not just trying to do both of these at the same time. Sometimes you are going to be working and life is going to suffer a little bit, but then you have to reciprocate by focusing on life and being okay with work suffering a little bit. Again, like I don't agree with just those two distinctions, but I do think that the section, there's some interesting takeaways. So number one, he talks about the term work-life balance not being coined until the 80s, when more than half of all married women joined the workforce. And Ralph E. Gomeroy, I believe is the author he credits this to, says, we went from a family unit with one breadwinner and one homemaker to one with two breadwinners and no homemaker. So women specifically under this model are feeling the pressure of going into the workforce, but still being expected unfairly, I would argue, by society and their husbands to manage all of the life stuff at home too. So if that sounds like an impossible situation, I would argue that it is, but also that's the one we willingly embrace whenever we talk about work-life balance.
Yeah.
It's just not set up for success.
I thought it was interesting because he did a count of the number of times the phrase work-life balance was mentioned in newspapers and magazine articles.
Yeah.
And in the decade from 1986 to 1996, so in 10 years, that phrase was used 32 times in newspapers and magazine articles. Mm-hmm. And in the year 1997 alone, it was 34 times. Now, fast forward to 2011, because he doesn't have any data in here beyond that, but in 2011, in that 1 year, it was 1,452 times.
Yeah, ridiculous.
It had a peak in 2007 at 1,674. So it's kind of nuts. I think of it as a term that's been around for a long time, but in regards to history, it's very new.
Yep, definitely. The other thing worth calling out here, in my opinion, is this analogy he shared of juggling balls, which even here, he's kind of destroying his own visuals of work versus life because there's more than these two balls. But he says that you have all these balls that you're juggling, family, integrity, whatever. And I didn't really write down the specific areas because, again, I think like these areas, you define these for yourself. He talks about these a little bit later too. But really just the analogy here is that you've got all these balls that you're juggling. Work is the one that is rubber and will bounce back. The rest of them are made of glass. So those are the ones you have to be careful with. You can't excuse all the other stuff just because work is saying to do this, which is easier to do when you are the one calling the shots about how you work. I was kind of interested to get your response to this, given the fact that you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you work for a company now, and we recorded this on New Year's Day because this is the day you have off.
Yes.
So, like, what was your response to that analogy? Did you, again, like, I read it and I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to make sure that I chuck the work ball if I'm gonna let something go. But I don't know. Did you have a different reaction because of your situation, and maybe you don't have as much flexibility with that that particular ball?
I think I'm in a weird position with this. So I used to work corporate. Then I worked for a virtual company. Then I worked for myself for 3 years, and now I'm back in corporate. And so I've been in all of those scenarios, and I worked for a small company before I worked corporate originally. So I've been in all of those different scenarios, and I think right now I'm in a weird spot where I understand, like, I'll put it this way. Corporate is a much slower pace than what I'm used to pulling. So for me, it's pretty easy for me to say, yeah, work can bounce back, but frankly, it's not too hard to keep that ball in the air at all, like, especially considering what I've just come from. So I get his analogy. I think it's a little weird to think of it that way, but to me, I see it as if I keep the work plate spinning, all the others I can focus on a little more. Because to me, the work one, I can almost put it on autopilot in a lot of ways. I'm pretty good at segmenting my focus when I'm back and forth. So to me, the hard part is making sure I've got the time part nailed down. For me, the focus piece, I'm pretty good about. I'm going to go work on my work stuff here, and I'm going to be 100% engaged in that. Okay, work is done, get home, and now I'm going to be 100% at home. Like, I'm usually pretty good at that, especially right now. So working corporate actually makes that easier than working for myself. So I don't know. I didn't really find anything with this that struck me as, yeah, that's completely dead on, or no, that's absolutely wrong. It's like, well, there's a lot of areas. It's not just work and life. Like, I have friendships, I have my faith, I have, I still have a side gig. I've got all these different things. Like, it's a matter of keeping them all in check. Sometimes one has to be more in focus than the others, and they need to give and take. But I tend to have my family as the core, and the others work around that, as opposed to work being the center of that and everything works around it.
Okay.
Like, I think of it very differently because of that. So I don't know. I'm an oddball. I'm aware of that.
Aren't we all?
Everybody's special in their own way.
All right.
Big is bad, Mike.
Yeah, big is bad. This is the last one in the lies section. This was an interesting one for me, again, because of my situation. So he's got lots of cool visuals throughout this entire book. And I took a picture of the one for this section and put it in the MindNode file. But this one really wasn't that powerful, the visual. But the idea behind it basically is that when you connect big with bad, it triggers what he calls shrinking thinking. And so we kind of lower our trajectory to what we consider to be safe. But the truth is that no one knows their ultimate ceiling. So worrying about what your ceiling is kind of a waste of time. And as it pertains to my situation, I'm getting ready to officially launch faith-based productivity. I struggle with thinking big about that. So that's one of my action items, is to think big about faith-based productivity. On page 92, he says that to live great, you have to think big. You must be open to the possibility that your life and what you accomplish can become great. Achievement and abundance show up because they're the natural outcome of doing the right things with no limits attached. That's kind of getting back to the one thing, the knocking down the right dominoes. He's basically saying in this section that if you just knock down the right dominoes, you will end up doing something great. There will be achievement and abundance simply by doing the right thing over and over and over again. And the thing that I'm asking myself, and I don't know all the answers yet here, but like I said, I do have trouble thinking big about some of the stuff that I do. I want to think to myself and identify all the places where I have been subject to this shrinking thinking and kind of figure out for myself, how have I limited myself simply by the approach that I've taken? I've noticed, even when I started doing the faith-based productivity, talking to different people, I would hear things come out of my mouth like, well, this is the thing I want to do, but I don't know how big this can be. And I've had people cut me off and they're like, no, you don't even understand. Like, this could be big. And for whatever reason, I have trouble accepting that. So I want to fix that, and I want to start thinking bigger. And I kind of believe that if you can train yourself to think big about the things that you do, obviously you can't just throw out a big dream, and if you're not going to do anything that's going to lead you to that point, then you aren't going to get those results. But I kind of think what Gary Keller is telling us, and the thing that is appropriate for me right now, is to focus on the little things that you know to do, and then do those consistently, all the while thinking big, because that's going to provide the motivation to keep going. And before long, you're knocking down some big dominoes that you didn't think you would ever be able to knock down. That's exciting and terrifying. And on the surface, you might say, like, well, why is that terrifying? Because the fact that you're doing it, when you put forth the effort, there's only two possible outcomes. You either succeed or you fail. As long as you don't try to knock down the dominoes, you've always got that third option of, well, someday I might be able to get serious about this and start knocking down the dominoes, and then my life is going to be different. But it's scary when you do start knocking down those dominoes and you don't know what the outcome's going to be, because the voice in my head is saying, this isn't going to work. And I recognize after reading this particular section that I got to stop that. I have to start thinking positive, and I have to start seeing big picture. Like, maybe I do get connected with the right people and this thing blows up, and X, Y, Z and the other thing. That's going to provide a lot more benefit than capping myself and hedging my bets. I think that's the justification that a lot of people, myself included, will use. It's like, well, if I don't think big, then I won't be disappointed if it doesn't happen. But that's, I don't know. The fact that it's not even an option is more disappointing.
That's lame. Don't do that.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm recognizing that's not the right way to do this. I need to let myself think big, and just by doing that, the dominoes I believe it'll bring clarity to the right dominoes that need to be knocked over, and in the end, it is going to have a significant positive impact. And I'm going to get a lot further than I would have if I would have subscribed to the lower trajectory, the shrinking thinking, whatever. Just go for it. And when you hit your ceiling, that's fine. But once you get to that point, you can say, okay, there's my ceiling. But I think the sad thing is, like, if you don't want to hit the ceiling, then you're just never going to get there. You don't know how high it is.
I think too many people suffer from fear of disappointment. Like, don't be afraid of it. Like, you're going to be disappointed by things at some point. Like, you can definitely set yourself up for failure, but I don't think you should worry about, like, if you want, take faith-based productivity as an example. Let's say you launch it and 10,000 people sign up for it. And you probably smirked whenever I said that, Mike.
Yep.
That isn't unreasonable in my mind. But if you expect it, that's different than thinking that you could have something big. Like,
yep.
If you're expecting a big number, to me, that's different than expecting it to be big or acting as if it's a big thing. So I don't think you should be, scared of that or afraid of it as much as embrace it. Even, like, he even goes into Carol Dweck's mindset book here.
Yep.
And the whole growth mindset versus the
fixed mindset.
Fixed, there you go. I was drawing a blank on it. So do you have a ceiling, or can you grow past that? You can grow past it.
Right.
I mean, I don't think we would argue with that. So don't be afraid of growing to the point where you do have something big. Don't be afraid of that. Even Bookworm has been growing quite a bit lately. So thank you, listeners. But it's been fun to watch it continually grow. I don't know if that's because we changed our mindset on it, or if it's just been around long enough. But
yes,
yeah, it's not a thing. I think we're afraid of it going big. I think we definitely expect it to get big. So yes, there you go.
And that actually leads in perfectly to the next section. So part 2 is the truth, and this is where we get into chapter 10, the focusing question. This is the single takeaway from the entire book. Asking this question.
Yep.
What is the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And if you're not careful, I think you can miss the impact that this question has, which is why, I mean, he mentions it at the beginning, and you were asking, should we share it now or should we do it later on? But really, chapter 10 is where he's really hitting this for the first time, in my opinion, really strongly, because I think you have to understand the value that comes from asking the right questions. Otherwise, this simple little question, it's like, well, there's nothing profound about that. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't that profound, but there is a lot of power from asking the right questions. In fact, he says that the quality of any answer is directly determined by the quality of the question. This is what my whole personal retreat handbook course is built off of: asking the right questions and giving your brain enough time to unravel them. And everybody that I know that has done not just the process that I share, but like this whole idea of thinking time, they're blown away at the results that they get simply by asking the right questions. He says to get better answers, you have to ask better questions. He shares a quote by Voltaire: judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. And so this focusing question, this is the thing that will lead you to your first domino. But you can apply this, the 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20. So you could say, out of all the projects that I can be working on, what's the one project I can do that by doing it, everything else is going to be easier or unnecessary? Okay, you identify your project. Then you can ask this about your project. What's the one thing I can do right now that by doing it, this project, and everything else is going to be easier or unnecessary? This single question, if you just keep applying this over and over and over again, I really do believe that this helps you knock down the right dominoes. This produces the results that he was talking about in the first section that the lies will try to keep you from getting. So I do really like the structure of the book and the fact that he's getting to this question at this point. But this is, we're like, what, an hour and a half into this episode, and we're finally getting to
Yes.
this. Like, there's a reason that this is delayed, and that is to maximize the impact that it has, in my opinion. So I just really drive home strongly right now, if you're still listening to this episode, like, this is the thing. Make sure that you understand this and simply apply this question and apply it, maybe test it out, in different areas of your life. Maybe you're not going to go redo your whole productivity system based off of this one question. Maybe test it first. But everybody that I know that has done that has been blown away by the clarity that they get from doing this. Now, I know the first time you've read this book, so I read it before, and this was the thing that really impacted me. So what was your response to this focusing question? Were you like, this is too simple, or?
No, I don't think it is. With great questions come great answers. So, there's that whole side of things. But I want to couple this with the next chapter. One, to help speed us up. Two, that it made more sense to me with the next one. So the next chapter is the success habit.
Yep.
And in that, he talks about the importance of asking this question on a repeated basis.
Right.
That's the sum total of what he's getting at. So ask it on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a yearly basis. Like, anytime you need to make a big decision, or something is going on that you don't like, or something's not going on that you do want to happen, like, this is the question you need to ask. And part of me really wishes this question was a part of getting things done.
Yeah.
That David Allen had put it into that system, because it would solve a lot of the issues that people have with that structure. But to me, I know, like, I have points in my morning and at the end of my day where I'm not necessarily asking questions, but there are things that I do that require me to ask myself questions. Like, what is my plan for the week ahead? I write it on the list as weekly plan, but I know that I'm asking myself what is it I need to accomplish this week? Well, I don't really think of it as what's the one thing I could be doing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. Like, I don't ask myself that question, but I have been doing that the last, I don't know, it's probably not been a week with holidays and such, but last 3 or 4 days I've been asking this question on a daily basis. It does have some pretty interesting effects. Nothing like groundbreaking currently, but it's a very fascinating way of coming at things. So to me, I simply implemented it as part of my regular routines, which is why I love having those checklists that I work off of during those times, because it's very easy for me to alter those habits just by adding something to that list or removing it, or tweaking what it says. Like that's the part that's important. So to me, the success habit here is asking this on a repeated basis. But the answers that I get whenever I ask this question sometimes surprise me, and it's not always intuitive on what I should be doing to drive me at the broader mission. So I love the question. I wish I had been asking myself this earlier.
Right. And he breaks down, I forget if it's in chapter 11, maybe chapter 10, like the 3 different parts of the question. I don't think that part I didn't really think was all that strong, but the way he phrased this question is very specific. Like it accomplishes a specific outcome that he engineered it to do. So you've got like the one thing, that's the 2-inch domino, that's the approachable piece. I can do that. Such by doing it, everything else is going to be easier or unnecessary. The main idea there is that there's a system which is going to be affected by this single action. And I think like it's different than asking what's the most important thing that I can do. So in terms of systems, the one thing that you can do, which is going to make everything else easier or unnecessary, if you focus on the last part of that, what's going to make everything else that I do easier or unnecessary, that brings a lot more clarity than just saying like, well, what's the one thing I should be doing? And that's the thing I want to call out here, because I think the first time I read this, after a while, I kind of regressed to abbreviating this question to what's the one thing I should be doing? And I think the systems aspect of this is very important. He also talks about in chapter 11 here, specifically applying the focusing question to all different areas of your life. He's got what looks kind of like a wheel of life sort of a thing. That's what it reminded me of anyways, where you've got your finances, your spiritual life, your physical health, your personal life, your key relationships, your job or your business. And he's got arrows pointing to all these different circles and what's the one thing I can do for all these different areas. I agree with that in principle. I do think there's a danger, though, in trying to do all of these one things at the same time. Maybe if you break it down small enough and you create these as habits, you can touch on all of these, but the 12-week year is basically built on the principle that you can't tackle everything at once. So, in my opinion, this is the point of the book where I would throw out a caution. If you're getting excited about the idea of the one thing and you see this picture and you see, yeah, like those are the different areas of my life that I want to address, and you start asking yourself this question, pretty soon you've got goals that you're trying to accomplish in all these different areas, you will probably get overwhelmed and frustrated.
I disagree, but
yeah,
we're good at that. I saw this wheel and thought that's a great way to come at this, because if you stop and think about it, yes, you could do one thing in all these areas and be overwhelmed, but the trick is you're only doing one thing. You're not focused on all the extra chaos that comes with it. That's part of the point that he's got here. So you're limiting it. You know, if you take this in its totality, the way he intends it, you're actually doing less by doing this. So it's easier to do the most important thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary if you do that in every area. So to me, it's easier to do it in all of these than it is to try to do it in one and not the others.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does.
That might be crazy. This might be a case of Joe gone nuts, but
I feel like it's kind of counter to his argument for a balanced life where you are picking either work or life to work on. And when I look at this circle, I see business and job as work and all of these other things as life. And since he said earlier, you're going to be focusing on work or life and neglecting the other one occasionally, to try to do all 7 days at the same time seems overwhelming to me. But I think I understand what you're saying. And I do think like once you get a system in place, there is a lot of value in figuring out what's like the one simple thing I can do for all of these areas that I'm absolutely just not going to neglect. Because I think practically that's how it pans out for me. I go to the gym every day. I read my Bible and pray every day. So I'm checking a lot of these boxes that he has here. But in terms of goal setting and big outcomes, that's where I think applying this question gets a little bit, needs a disclaimer, I guess. But if you're looking at it as just, I want to set up a simple habit every single day, I don't even want to think about it, it's going to become automatic at some point. Maybe it's going to be 18 days, maybe it's going to be 254 days. Who cares? Like, this is the thing I want to make sure that I do every day. That makes sense, where you are going to build it into sort of a routine. But I don't know, maybe just because of my situation with faith-based productivity and trying to think big, and that's more like project focused. That's my approach to reading this, where I kind of view it as trying to do all these things is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I think if you read the questions he has on the page just on the opposite side of this, the questions he asks are not, and this is maybe the misnomer here, is that he's saying that big is not bad.
Yep.
That you should think big to try to get a great answer to these things. And yet the questions in this specific area during the success habit, the questions he's asking are not... They're not that. They're not massive.
Yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
I don't think that asking this question and trying to say, okay, spiritual life, finances, business, relationships, personal life, my job, my physical health, what's the one thing I can do to achieve enormous success in each one of those and really drive it hard? I don't think that's what he's getting at in this specific chapter. I think he's more saying this has profound effects if you ask these questions in these different areas. I don't even know if he's saying do them all at once.
Yeah.
He's just saying, this is something that you can do in each of these areas that can have a profound effect. And I don't think I would argue with that. I'm going to attempt to do a lot of these all at once, so we'll find out.
All right.
We'll see how it goes. It's New Year, time to do resolutions, right? We'll say that's a resolution maybe, but... That's my approach with it. Is like, these aren't necessarily going to be big. I do have one area where I'm going to push really hard, similar to what you're talking about. Disclaimer: it's not corporate. Just saying. But this is a thing that I think you can do in all of these areas. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have one, or that you're going to be huge in all of them. I think you're definitely going to be unbalanced in one area, and that one area is where you go big.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the way I'm coming at it. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's the way I interpreted it.
No, and I think that's the right way to apply this, to be honest. I guess I'm just lumping this all together in my MindNode file under part 2, and it's all like leading together, because in the next section, chapter 12, he talks about the path to great answers. This is where he has a picture. Number 1, ask a great question. And then number 2, find a great answer. So if you were to ask a great question, to find a great answer, and to think big about all of these different areas, that's where the danger lies, in my opinion. And maybe that's not what he's saying, but that's where my brain went. And probably it's because I've been doing like the Wheel of Life stuff recently anyways, and that's what it reminded me of when I saw that visual. But yeah, so if you're approaching this as maintenance mode, what are the things that I can do in these areas every single day? Like that's one very valid approach. Another very valid approach would be, okay, I want to set a big goal in one of these areas. Which one do I want to focus on? But the one to stay away from is to think big and specific about all of these different areas at once and try to do everything in all those different areas. In my opinion, unless you were completely, and maybe this is what he meant and this is what he was able to do. But for a lot of people, I think you don't have complete control over your entire day where you can just press the reset button and start from scratch. Like for your example, you've got to show up for work regardless of what your big priority is. You have to work around that thing, and that's okay in my opinion. But to really just go hard on all these things at once, like it does require you to have complete control of how you design your life. And I think that's ideal, but maybe not realistic for a lot of people.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the path to great answers, and then we'll see if we can lump all of part 3 together all in one shot.
Sure. Yeah, this is a long one. All right, so the path to great answers, he mentions the asking a great question, finding a great answer, and the question should be big and specific. He's got like the 4 different quadrants: big and broad, small and specific, and big and specific. The reason you want to select a big and specific question is that it will force you to change the way you do things in order to achieve it. And this is the thing that I think is really an important point, but can also be something that turns a lot of people off, is this idea of, well, I could set this goal for this thing that's doable. I could set this goal, which is a little bit of a stretch for me, or I could set this goal, which is way out there, but it is possible. It's just going to require significant change on my part and creating new systems and things like that to get there. And that's what he's arguing for here, which is why I don't think you can do this about the 7 different areas. You got to really like pick one to focus on. But extraordinary results, he says here, require a great answer and require you to live outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I saw this as a way to come up with a question and answer, to just do goal setting, to nail down like a mission of sorts that you should be asking the one thing question about, or using that to help get you there. So that was the only thing I had an issue with on this chapter, is how do you connect this to the focusing question? Like, it seemed like it was a bit of an ad on top of that. So I had a little bit of a struggle trying to figure out how he wanted this all to work together. But I understand it too. It's go big or go home.
Yep. Yeah, so I think what he would say, and he's not here to defend himself, so we'll talk about him.
So I'll win.
I think what he would say is to set a big and specific goal, which is so far out there that if you were to continue doing the things that you're doing now, there's no way you could do it. And some of the examples he mentions, like, how can we double sales in the next 6 months? That's not possible with the current way things are, most likely. So then you have to figure out what are the changes that you need to make. And that does tie into the focusing question, because when you're hitting the reset button and you're trying to create a new system, the focusing question, I would argue, is the most important in that scenario, because of the last part of it, which is that it's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary. So when a lot of people want to, that's a general statement, I know that, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say you want to start a business, okay? You don't go print business cards. You probably don't even create a website unless you're an internet-based business, like a lot of the stuff that you and I do, Joe. Like that would be one of the first things that you do. But for somebody who's gonna do carpentry on the side, like maybe you don't need the website, maybe you need to do something else. But those are the things that people get caught up on. And if you ask this question, it's easy to say, well, I don't need the business card first. I need the product to sell or whatever. And that's where I think like this can be really helpful when you're going back to the drawing board and you're trying to figure out, what do I need to do to get to that point? Because you could say, well, if I'm going to set this goal, which is beyond a stretch and it's in the realm of possibility, I need to have X, Y, Z and the other thing. I don't know anything about websites. I don't have anybody who can design me a logo, but that's the thing that even though I'm not really skilled at that, I'm going to pick at that and I'm going to invest a whole bunch of time and waste a whole bunch of time, I would argue, because it's going to provide a little bit of procrastination for the thing that I know I really should be doing. And that's where the focusing question can really help you identify right away, like, this is not the thing that you should be doing right now. This right here, this is the thing, because it's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary. I think that really helps. That could really help a lot of people. So
part 3, extraordinary results. Here's what I vote we do on this, since this is going to be long anyway. I think we should go through, there's 4 things we got in our outline, folks. We've got purpose, priority, and productivity. That's all kind of as one. Time blocking, which I'm guessing we want to spend a little time with. 3 commitments, the 4 thieves. I think we should talk about the 3 commitments very quickly, the 4 thieves, and then come back and do the other 2.
Okay.
That's my thinking, because we'll want to spend more time on the other 2.
All right, so the 3 commitments, and I got to find this section. There we go. All right, this is chapter 16. The 3 commitments are, number 1, follow the path of mastery. Number 2, move from E to P. And 3, live the accountability cycle. All right, following the path of mastery, this kind of comes back to what I consider to be a misquoted thing he attributed to Anders Ericsson. He said that he came up with the 10,000 hour rule, but we read Peak and he basically railed against Malcolm Gladwell for creating the 10,000 hour rule. Or am I misremembering?
Malcolm Gladwell used Anders Ericsson's study to get that number.
Okay.
So it is, I think he has it correctly attributed here. Because I'm pretty sure Gladwell used that number. He got that number from someone else. He's not the one that came up with it. I think Gladwell even states that in his book. Okay.
But I do remember when we read Peak that the 10,000 hour rule was basically a myth. But he's saying like the 10,000 hour rule is kind of the way to achieve mastery, which if you really want to dig into that, you can go listen to that episode.
Yep. Been there.
Mastery. Mastery also, though, which is worth calling out here, it's a path you go down. It's not a destination you arrive at, which I thought was an important distinction. Mastery is really just giving the best that you have to become the best that you can be at your most important work. So that goes back to the we started off this episode talking about the early episodes of Bookworm and how if we were to go back and listen to them, we'd probably be ashamed of the quality of those. Like that doesn't matter because those were steps on the journey to mastery. Not that we've achieved it yet, but we're on the trajectory. And that's what he's saying the path of mastery is. It's not putting in the 10,000 hours and after the 10,000th hour, now finally you are on the path of mastery.
The second one here is move from E to P. E being the entrepreneurial way of doing things and P being the purposeful way of doing things. His point is the E, entrepreneurial, is our natural approach, whereas purposeful is like you're working with mission. And I think the interesting thing with this is that if you're an entrepreneur, you tend to come at things and say, okay, here's a new thing that needs someone to do something about. And you jump in and you're going super fast, and at some point it gets hard, and you can either push through, but most entrepreneurs have a tendency to say, oh, wait, there's this other area that has this new thing that could use some work. I'm going to go jump in on that. So you tend to cap your achievement by constantly going just a little ways and then stopping and coming back.
Yep.
Whereas the purposeful approach is when you're doing, as he says, quote unquote, doing what comes unnaturally, where you use things like the systems and the models and the focus to drive up your willpower in order to break through that natural ceiling of achievement so that you can then achieve a much higher level of success than you ever possibly could using the entrepreneurial mindset.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the 4 points on the graphic that he's got there for the entrepreneurial mindset: number 1, disappointment; number 2, resignation; number 3, greener pastures; number 4, the cycle continues. And the purposeful mindset, which is the one that breaks through that plateau, number 1, focus; number 2, models; number 3, systems; and number 4, breakthrough. Basic takeaway, in my opinion, would be connecting to your purpose, finding your why. That's what allows you to make the modifications to the models and systems that allow you to break through the glass ceiling.
Last one here, the accountability.
All right. Live the accountability cycle. There's another graphic here, which I don't think is real great, to be honest with you. But the main takeaway here for me was that the accountability mindset is going to be looking for solutions. So page 184, he says you can either be the author of your life or the victim of it. Don't settle for the victim mentality. You have control over certain things in your situation. Maybe you don't have complete control, but figuring out what you can control and manipulating those systems to produce the results that you want will create more control and more freedom. And as you take that approach, one of the things that can help you consistently follow through with that is accountability. So you could apply that as accountability to yourself. We talked about that earlier, the ability to make a promise to yourself and follow through with it. But also, if you need some help, there's nothing wrong with that either. One of the questions that I wrote down was, who's holding you accountable? And if you really want some accountability, I mean, even something like the Bookworm Club is a great place to start. It's free. You can go on there. You can share your action items from the books. Podcast Book Club. We're all in this together. even just writing it and posting it somewhere publicly for other people to see, maybe that's the thing that helps you follow through and do the things that you're supposed to do. But identifying ways that you can have accountability can provide enough traction for you to do your one thing. And that's important.
Absolutely. Now, the 4 thieves, I'm going to run through these quick and we'll come back to time blocking. The 4 thieves: inability to say no, the fear of chaos, poor health habits, and the environment doesn't support your goals. Now, he goes through the importance of having good productivity. I think we've talked about all of these to some degree over the life of Bookworm. The inability to say no, you're saying yes too many times. You have too many commitments. This is probably the number one thing I think we see in the productivity space, probably, Mike, is folks have said yes way too many times and there's too much on their lists. Pretty common. 2, fear of chaos. When you start focusing on the one thing that you're supposed to be doing in that day, it's inevitable that other areas of your life are going to fall apart in some degree.
Yep.
And he's saying that don't let that chaos scare you. And it's going to happen, at least for a time.
Oh, it's coming.
So yeah, it's going to hit you. So anyway, don't be afraid of that. Poor health habits. This is part of what I'm working on right now, is revamping my diet to some degree in order to help me with some health issues. So that's just a thing that, you need to be aware of. But he does get into meditating.
Yeah, he's got a recommended routine.
Yep, he's got a whole routine here that, okay, sure, I'm going to do mine.
Which, by the way, as a side note, this is one of the things that, there are whole books written on these recommended routines. This is one small section in one of 18 chapters in this book. So I feel like there's a ton of stuff in here, which if you just took it and applied it at surface value, would provide a huge amount of value to your life. But it's almost lost in the shuffle because there's so much stuff in here.
Right.
And it's not directly tied to the one thing. I mean, he does a pretty good job of tying it back to that focusing question. But the recommended routine, there's a lot of great stuff there, but he doesn't get into all the different specifics that Hal Elrod does in The Miracle Morning. But still, the stuff that he lists here is pretty good. Main idea for me is just protect the golden goose.
Yes. The last thief of productivity here, I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about diet. The environment doesn't support your goals. So if the people you're around are constantly bringing you down, or your work environment is such that it makes it hard for you to do your job, those are all things that are going to prevent you from being productive and working towards that one thing. So do something about it. Don't let it rob from you. Okay, now
exactly.
Let's talk about purpose and time blocking, Mike. I'm sure you have lots to talk about here.
Sure. So purpose, priority, and productivity is the model that he shares actually at the beginning of this part. So it's not even in a chapter necessarily. There is a chapter devoted to live with purpose, live with priority, and live for productivity. But he shares the iceberg picture in the 2-page thing at the beginning of chapter 3, which shows productivity as the top part of the iceberg above the water. Underneath that, you've got priority, and then you've got purpose. So I think this is a fair representation of this. I do like the alliteration with the productivity, priority, and purpose. It reminded me a lot of the analogy that I came up with for the word hustle, because my book is called Thou Shalt Hustle. And this actually isn't in the book, so don't buy the book expecting to see it. I need to revise the book. But the definition of hustle is to force to move hurriedly or unceremoniously in a specified direction. And the point that I make is that there's 3 parts there: vision, purpose, and work. And the work he would call productivity. The purpose he would call priority. And vision, as I call it, he would call purpose. Where's the big thing that your why? And then that's going to dictate the direction that you're moving. But what people ultimately is going to see is the work, or in his case, the productivity. And I think that productivity for productivity's sake, work for work's sake, quote unquote hustle, like most people think of it, just cranking or grinding, that's not really accurate. And that's just going to lead to burnout. It's not going to lead to the big results like you were talking about earlier, working the 70, 80 hours a week. That's not the way to get there. And again, this is part 3, extraordinary results. So the way to achieve those extraordinary results is to tie these things together. Also in this section, by the way, the word priority, this was interesting to me. The origin of the word priority from the 14th century, it comes from the Latin prior, which means first, and it's something that means the principal thing. So if something mattered the most, it was a priority. But it remained unpluralized until around the 20th century when it was demoted to mean something that matters. So now we've got 5 different levels of priorities. And really the point he's making is that there is no top priority or multiple levels of priority. There is just a thing that is most important. That is priority. And so that's how he applies the one thing to this, which again is really powerful. If you can identify the vision, the thinking big about your future, the purpose that you want to achieve, and then the one thing, the priority, the vector, the direction that you want to go, that's going to dictate the one thing, the action that you take, the productivity, the work that you actually do.
Yeah, I think the piece about the priority that I really liked is page 150. He called it goal setting to the now.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated this because, everybody does goals to some degree, especially this time of year. And I'll just walk through this quick and then we can go on. But you have a someday goal. So what's one thing I want to do someday? Okay, well, great. Let's take that to the next level. Okay, in order to hit that someday goal, what's the one thing I can do in the next 5 years to hit it? Okay, well, based on that 5-year goal, what's the one thing I can do this year to hit that goal? You see where I'm going here? So based on the 1 year, what's the one thing I can do this month? What's the one thing I can do this week? What's the one thing I can do today? What's the one thing I can do right now? I really appreciated that because although we know that somewhat intuitively, no one does it. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I would do that. And this is why I say I've got 2 action items here. One is to ask this question, the focusing question, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. And the goal there is that I'm constantly doing this exact process, is that I can write down my answers to what's my long-term goal, what is it I need to do this year to hit that. Like, that's the exact process I'm working through. It's probably not going to happen today. It's probably going to happen sometime this week or this upcoming weekend that I'll get through all of that. But that's the plan, is to use this exact model to get there, because once these priorities are nailed down, answering that question on a daily basis gets really easy.
Yep.
Really easy. So
yeah, and that ties into the idea of hyperbolic discounting, where the farther away a reward is in the future, the smaller the immediate motivation to achieve it. So what you're doing when you employ that methodology is you're creating momentum for that essentially someday maybe goal, that thing that's way out there, but it's going to provide the motivation to take action on it every single day, because all you've got to do is this one thing, not work on something for 10 years and then eventually you get there. It makes it a lot more palatable, I guess. It's a lot easier to show up every day and do that thing when you break it down like that.
And one tool that he tells you to use that can really drive a lot of this is time blocking, which we both have as action items here, Mike.
Yep.
And I feel like everybody knows what time blocking is. You put a time on your calendar, and that's when you're going to work on the specific item. And in this case, it's your one thing. And he recommends like a 4-hour block, and he has all kinds of reasons for how he got to 4 hours, and recommends 8 a.m. to noon.
Yep.
That's crazy talk.
Right.
Like, that's not going to happen, especially for me right now. Like, I'm going to be doing good to get 30 minutes towards it every day. So I don't see this as a thing where I'm going to put 4 hours to it, but I did greatly appreciate that this is something you should put on your calendar, keep your commitment to yourself, and over time, this is going to have a huge impact. I totally buy into that. I just know that me personally, I do struggle with keeping these types of commitments to myself. It's very easy for me to plan over them and such. So I know I'll struggle with this, so I'll definitely need your help here, Mike. But I'm at least going to give it a shot. We'll see how it goes.
Nice. Yeah, this is from chapter 15, Live for Productivity. And the point that he makes at the beginning of this chapter is page 157. Putting together a life of extraordinary results simply comes down to getting the most out of what you do when what you do matters. So does what you do matter, and is what you're doing going to matter? Ultimately is the question that you're asking there. But then if you were to break that down and assuming that what you're working on does matter, then you want to be as quote unquote, dang it, I said it again. You want to be as productive as possible. So the question he asks is, how much is the system that you're using worth? Because he says money is a metaphor for producing results. So time is money, essentially. The time management system that you use produces the money that you make. So he says, are you using a $10,000 a year system? Or is it a $100,000 a year system? Is it a $1 million a year system? And the question really is, how much do you make? That's a little bit uncomfortable to ask that, but I get the point that he's making there. So if you're assuming that the results you have are coming from the system that you're using, and if you're assigning a dollar value of how much you make to the system that you're using in terms of what it's worth, then maybe if it's not producing the results that you want, you should chuck it and design as a system that is more valuable. That's where he's making the argument for time blocking. And he talks about the different time blocks. He says there's 3 different time blocks you need. Number 1 is time off. Number 2 is your one thing. And then number 3 is your planning time. I really like the idea behind those. I agree with you that when he shares the example, it's kind of like not approachable for most people. But the one thing that I really got from this in terms of time blocking, well, a couple things. Number 1, time off being important. So having that be your first time block, I thought that was a little bit radical, but as I thought about that, I'm like, no, actually that makes a lot of sense. And then secondly, your one thing appearing on your calendar, and like you said, he's doing it 4 hours a day. I probably can't even do it 4 hours a day, even in my current situation, but it really made me think, what is the thing that I should be doing? What is my one thing? I think it's writing. Writing is also the thing that I tend to not get around to doing because I'm fiddling with the systems or creating products or whatever.
Or buying a Mac Mini.
But I'm recognizing that if I were to simply create writing as a habit and do it not for 4 hours a day, maybe it's just an hour or 2 every day, that would make a lot of the stuff that I do a lot simpler. When it comes to creating product, I've got the stuff written. When it comes to sending out the newsletters, I've got the articles written. This is definitely something I need to do. So that is going to be one of my action items, is to implement this time blocking with the 3 different blocks. And he also mentions a little bit later of scheduling a time block of an hour per week to review your goals. That's something that I haven't done very well. You could say that's part of your weekly review, which again, not something I've done very well recently. So that's my other action item from this section. And again, this is a section where there's a ton of stuff in here. A couple of pages, he talks about maker versus manager time. We could do a whole podcast episode on that topic, but that's another way that could influence your time blocking. He also talks about not breaking the chain, the Jerry Seinfeld story. He gives that guy a name, by the way, which I never heard before. Brad Isaac is a software developer who apparently ran into Jerry Seinfeld at an open mic comedy club. And he asked Jerry Seinfeld how to become a better comic. And the story goes that Seinfeld told him to get a big calendar, put a red X on every day you work on your craft, keep at it, chain's going to grow longer every day. You'll like seeing that chain, and then your only job then is to not break the chain. So again, like this is a productivity principle you probably, if you're listening to this, have heard somewhere else, but he attributes it and adds a little bit of detail for a story that I never really understood the whole thing. So I appreciated that. And again, like the don't break the chain, especially when you're talking about your one thing, that's a really powerful idea, but it's one minor piece in this one chapter in this big book, which he's trying to tie back to the focusing question. It's easy to overlook the importance of that.
Ready for action items?
Yeah, let's do it.
I have 2. I am going to do the goal setting to now, asking the question. Perfect time of year to do that, so good timing there. 2, I'm doing the time blocking thing. I've done this to some degree already with blocking off weekly time for a weekly review. I tend to do it on a monthly basis as well. And I quasi do it for a yearly thing. It's kind of what I'm doing this upcoming weekend. So I do some of it. Definitely I time block vacation time already. So the piece that I need to do is the actual work time. I've not been good about that. So that's the piece that I want to add to the whole thing. Like that's that's the thing I want to add overall to my calendaring method.
Nice. All right. So for me, I want to revamp my time blocking. As I mentioned, the 3 different blocks and the order that he applied them, I thought that was really good. And I also want to add one for reviewing my goals specifically, but I'll probably just build that into the weekly review and create a time block for that. I also want to think big about faith-based productivity. And that's the one that there's no way you'll be able to hold me accountable for. Actually, it's the third one you probably won't be able to hold me accountable for either, and that is to ask the question, who can I help succeed? But I do think that I've already seen some changes in the way that I interact with people after reading this, and so I hope that that continues. I guess if you see me not doing that, you can hold me accountable and say, hey, you said you were going to do this, but it's more just a mindset that I want to change.
You could take number 3, who can I help succeed? Do it on yourself and get number 2, think big.
Oh, there we go. Get meta with my action items.
Ooh, double dip. All right, we'll check in next time. Until then, author style and rating. No pressure, Mike.
You go first.
Okay, that's fine. So there's a couple points here. One, he had a chapter, maybe 2, that felt like they didn't connect, which is where I had... What was the one? The Path to Great Answers, where it was kind of like asking a goal-setting question. I had a hard time connecting that. I think you tried to help me understand that, but there's that piece. There's a few small things with like the Wheel of Life that do work, but we're not real sure how it fits in. Just some things that don't always seem to be cohesive, and that made it kind of hard for me in certain areas. Definitely love his style of writing. He's a great writer. Made it very easy for me to sit down and read without having to try to force my way through it. That was not an issue at all. So all of that to say, like, I really enjoyed this book. Definitely going to recommend it to quite a few people. It's an excellent primer on productivity in general, I think. And even people who are in the productivity space could really benefit from it. But because of some of those qualms I have with it, I am going to put it at a 4.0, Mike. There's just some things I feel like, number one, I don't think it fits the 5.0 category. That seems to become kind of sacred ground on Bookworm.
Sure.
But the 4.5, I'm like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's quite there to that point, so I'll stick with the 4.0.
All right. Well, I will definitely go 5.0. And I guess let me explain a little bit why, because I definitely agree with you. There are some things in here that don't seem to fit at first. And as I read it the second time, I'm in a different place. I have more experience in the productivity world. There's a lot of things in here that I did not understand how profound they were when you shared them the first time. And I think that the strength of this book is also the weakness in that it is sometimes hard to connect those things. So when I read it the first time, he's going over something like the morning routine, and I'm totally just not even getting it. I'm saying to myself, he already told me the focusing question. Why is he even putting this in here? Reading it now, I see how he's tying these things together. And what it did, reading it a second time, is it filled in a lot of blanks for me. So I actually got more reading it the second time, I think, than I did the first, even though
cool.
When I read it the first time, it had such a positive impact on me enough that I picked it my top book in the Bookworm draft. So I don't know. I think that this is, if you were to pick like one book that you were going to bring on a desert island in terms of productivity or self-development, personal growth, like this might be the one. Not just because of the title.
Well, it is the one.
Yeah. But there's so much stuff in here. Like even in the last chapter, he's talking about the journey. He's got a whole section on living large, which we didn't even cover, but there's a couple questions and there's an exercise where he says, write down your current income, multiply it by a number. It doesn't even matter what number it is. It has to be a number. And then ask, will my current actions get me to this number in the next 5 years? If they will, keep doubling it until they won't. Then make your actions match your answer. The first time you read something like that, you're like, well, that's easier for you to say, a lot harder for me to do. When I read it now, I'm like, you know what? That's really profound, and I completely missed it the first time. He's also got Bonnie Ware's Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Like, I've read now 30 Lessons for Living, which is an entire book on this topic. But the point that he's making at here is like, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. There's so much stuff like that that's in here. But also the way that it's presented, I feel like it's very approachable because you don't have to memorize a complete big system. You don't have to memorize the 3 commitments. You don't have to memorize the 4 thieves or the 6 lies or anything like that. The one thing that you have to do, that you have to understand in order for this book to impact your life is that focusing question, which even after I read it years later, like I was still thinking about that, I could still quote it. What is the one thing that by doing it is going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? So I think that this book is kind of unique in that it almost doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, or whether you're just being introduced to personal growth and productivity, or you've been in it for a long time. This is still going to be a book that it has the possibility to significantly impact your life. And so for that reason, I walk away from this book more impressed with it now than I did when I read it the first time. I kind of anticipated going into this book thinking that I'm looking back at it through rose-colored glasses, and there's that one question in there, but the rest of this is just going to be filler. Because I do remember that. Like, the one thing he gives you right at the beginning, and then the rest of it I don't remember. But going back through it again, I'm like, wow, there's actually a lot of meat here. And even though it's 230 pages, like you said, it's not too long. That's really strange for the books that we cover, where it's like, okay, I get the idea, you can move on now. He keeps moving on. And if you're going to pick one thing, if I were to pick one thing that to say negatively about it, it's that he doesn't do a good enough job of diving into the details of some of these different things that he's sharing here. It's almost like he has all this experience and he's assuming that he's talking to like a peer or a colleague who kind of understands this stuff already. And if you don't understand it, you don't have the opportunity to jump in and ask questions.
Sure.
But yeah, it's still my top book of all time, and definitely a 5.0.
Nice. It's a good one. All right. We'll put that one on the shelf. Coming up next, we were talking about Gladwell here just a little bit ago. Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Great timing.
Have you started this one?
I have not.
At all?
In fact, I don't even have this one yet. I need to order it.
Sure.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah. I am almost 30 pages in on it. And essentially, this is about snap decisions, the first 2 seconds whenever you encounter something and your gut reaction to it. The whole book is about those 2 seconds. That's my take on it so far. So
interesting.
I'm excited to talk through this one with you. But yes, that's what's coming up next.
Cool.
What's your pick?
The one after that, I went to the Bookworm Club, like I said I was going to, and looked at the top vote getters, and there were several which had the same number of votes. The one that was the most intriguing to me, well, actually there were 2 that were intriguing to me. Quiet by Susan Cain. I did not pick that one, but I think we definitely should talk about that one at some point, maybe just because I consider myself an introvert.
I've read that one before.
Have you? Okay.
It's a good one.
All right. Well, to be continued. But the one that I did select was The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen Rubin is somebody that I've been familiar with in the productivity space for a long time, but I don't think I've ever read anything by her. So that needs to change. And when I saw that was one of the most requested books, it was easy for me to select that one.
Nice. Well, looking forward to that one. That'll be good. I don't have a Gap book this time, Mike. Between Christmas and New Year's, starting a new job, it just wasn't happening.
Fair. A Gap book I'm reading right now, I picked up as it was just a comment that was made. It was referred to in a different book that we read, and I can't remember which one it was now. But it's The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. Again, kind of timely because as we're reading the one thing, there's a big section in here about thinking big. My action item, thinking big about faith-based productivity. That actually was not even on my radar when I started reading this, but it was just something that I heard somebody else recommend, and I'm just started it. I'm 15, 20 pages into it. And this is another one of those books, kind of like the Stephen Covey thing. I feel like if you were to read this, there's a lot of profound truth in here, but it's easy to write it off as like, this guy doesn't really know my situation. He has no idea what he's talking about. And so it's a little bit difficult to apply the right mindset to this and to believe that what he's saying is actually going to work. But this is something that has been around for a while. I think on the cover it said there's like 6 million copies sold or something. So it's not just this guy who wrote this book. Like, there's a lot of people, a lot of successful people who say like, this is a good book. Oh, I know where I heard about it. It was Michael Hyatt who referenced it, I think, in like Best Year Ever. And so Michael Hyatt, he's fairly successful. I'd like to achieve Michael Hyatt's success. So if he's attributing success to the mindsets approached by this book, then I'm going to give it a shot.
There you go.
Which, by the way, like, this episode's already way too long, but there's a section in the, where was that? It was in chapter 12, The Path to Great Answers, where he talks about how books offer great answers. He says in the one thing, a great way to get answers from someone who has achieved what you hope to achieve is to read a book. And I put as one of my little comments, I wonder what he'd think about bookworm. I kind of think he'd dig it.
Nice. All right. Well, in closing, I guess, Mike's been selecting books from our book list, the book recommendations. How many more are you doing? Are you just going to start picking them from that? Is that your plan?
Hopefully. Okay. I want to see more votes in there, though.
Okay. Well, here's your call to action, team. Like, get more votes in on the club. So club.bookworm.fm, there's a whole recommendations category. Sign up for an account, click the vote button. It's that simple. And if there's one that's not on the list that you want to be on the list, just add it. It's that simple. It's not too hard. Give it a shot.
Yeah, and we mentioned it in this episode, but if you want a little bit of accountability as you do your one thing, then share your action items on the Bookworm Club even. We'd love to see that sort of stuff. Join the podcast book club. Also, if you want to help out the show, you can use the links in the show notes. Those are Amazon affiliate links, so we get a little bit of a kickback when you decide to purchase a book or something that we talk about if you use those links. You can also leave a rating and review on iTunes. Joe and I were looking at those even before we recorded here, and I really appreciate the feedback that we get from those, the people who have asked us to stop saying quote and unquote, the people who pointed out that we should add chapter markers. Like, we do listen to that stuff and we try to implement that stuff, but even just leaving a 5-star rating, and you don't have to write a big lengthy review, that boosts the iTunes algorithm basically takes into account the ratings and also the recency of the ratings. So that helps other people find out about the show, believe it or not. And we would really appreciate it if you would help us join the revolution and take down KCRW as the #1 return for Bookworm. I'd appreciate it anyways.
All right. Call to action's done. Let's pick up our next book next time, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and we'll see what our first impression is, since that's what we're all about. There you go. We'll catch you next time.